A black millionaire is humiliated by a bank teller, but when he finally reveals his true identity, he leaves everyone in shock. How could someone so successful be treated with disdain in a place where he should be respected? This question echoed in Marcus Johnson's mind as he walked through the bustling streets of Manhattan, his heart heavy with the expectation of a day that promised to be ordinary but would change his life forever. He was a black man, a millionaire who had built his empire in the competitive tech sector, yet he was not immune to the prejudice that permeated society. The memory of his childhood in the Bronx, where his mother struggled to provide him with a decent education, still lingered with him. He had always strived to be a voice for change, but the challenges of everyday racism made him question his role as a success icon in the community. As he entered the traditional bank, Marcus found himself surrounded by a sophisticated yet cold environment. He wore simple clothes that did not draw attention, but that should not have been a reason to be treated like an intruder. When he approached the teller, he was met by Megan Parker, a white woman who without hesitation assessed him with a look of contempt. The irony in her words when she suggested he try another bank hit him like a punch to the stomach. The situation escalated when the bank manager was called, and upon revealing Marcus's true identity as one of the institution's largest investors, the atmosphere in the room changed drastically. The humiliation he had felt transformed into an opportunity for reflection, not just for him, but for everyone involved. Meanwhile, Rachel Morgan, a partner and close friend of Marcus, watched the scene from afar, her heart racing with the need to act. She had always believed that her company could be a force for social change, but she also knew that Marcus was cautious about exposing his personal life. The tension between them intensified with each conversation about how they could use Marcus's visibility to challenge institutional racism. She wanted him to become a public figure, but he hesitated, fearing what that could mean for his discreet life. At his mother Gloria's house, Marcus sought solace. The simplicity and love he found there always reminded him of his roots and the struggles they had faced together. Gloria, with her wisdom, encouraged him to use his privileged position to help those who were still fighting. He knew his story could inspire many, but the fear of being misunderstood paralyzed him. At the same time, Megan struggled with her own insecurities. Her conversation with her boyfriend Chris, after the incident at the bank, left her even more confused. He downplayed Marcus's humiliation, causing her to question not only her relationship, but her own beliefs. What was success to her? And what did it mean to live in a society that still perpetuated such prejudices? This encounter at the bank would become a turning point, connecting the lives of Marcus, Rachel, and Megan in ways they had never imagined. Each of them, on their own journey, would face the challenges imposed by social expectations and their own prejudices. The plot would unfold, revealing not only Marcus's struggle for recognition and respect, but also Megan's internal transformation and Rachel's burning desire for justice. The story was about to unravel, and each character would have to confront their truths and fight for a more equitable future. Marcus was at a crossroads in his life. After the incident at the bank, he couldn't stop thinking about his mother's words and the responsibility he carried. Every step he took through the streets of Manhattan felt heavier than before. He felt as if he were trapped in an invisible web of expectations and judgments, and the doubt about his role in society haunted him. The struggle his mother had faced throughout her life did not seem sufficient to prepare him for this new challenge. He knew he was a successful man, but the disdain he had encountered was a brutal reminder that racism still existed, even in the most unexpected places. As Marcus tried to process his feelings, Rachel, his friend and partner, was in shock over the scene she had witnessed. She had always seen Marcus as an example of perseverance and strength, but the humiliation he faced at the bank made her question what she really knew about the world around her. The desire to act burned within her, but she wondered how she could help without making the situation worse. Rachel remembered moments when Marcus inspired her to be bolder, to fight for change, but now she felt powerless. Her heart was torn between the need to support Marcus and the fear that her actions would not be enough. At home, Megan found herself in the midst of a whirlwind of emotions and thoughts. Her conversation with Chris left her unsettled. He, who had always been her safe harbor, seemed so distant in his opinions about what had happened. The disdain she had shown Marcus was not just a momentary lapse, it reflected her own insecurities and prejudices. In that moment, Megan felt torn between the need to justify herself and the desire to understand the reality of people like Marcus. She began researching racism, inequality, and social injustice, trying to find answers that could help her better understand her own behaviors. Meanwhile, Marcus, after days of reflection, decided he could not let himself be defeated. He recalled the lessons his mother had taught him about resilience and the importance of fighting for his rights. However, the idea of exposing himself and becoming a public figure made him nervous. He feared that people would see him only as a symbol, not as a human being with his own vulnerabilities. One morning, he received a message from Rachel, suggesting they meet to discuss what had happened. When they met at the cafe they used to frequent, the tension was palpable. Rachel began talking about the need to turn indignation into action, but Marcus interrupted her. He was tired of being the voice of change. He wanted to be heard, not just as a millionaire, but as someone with legitimate stories and feelings. The debate intensified, and Marcus began to question whether what he really wanted was to expose himself, or if he preferred to continue his discreet life away from the cameras and the spotlight. Rachel, on her part, was frustrated. She saw Marcus's potential to be an advocate and an example, but she couldn't convince him to take that step. Their friendship was being tested, and both began to feel helpless in the face of the situation. The pressure to act made Marcus feel even more isolated, while Rachel found herself caught between loyalty to her friend and the urgency to do something meaningful. In the midst of all this, Megan decided she needed to have an honest conversation with Chris. She no longer wanted to ignore the issues that bothered her. However, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Chris, upon hearing her concerns, became defensive and accused her of being overly sensitive. This left her even more confused and frustrated. How could someone she loved not understand the realities that people like Marcus faced? Each person's problems began to intertwine. Marcus did not want to be a symbol, but the desire to fight against injustice and help his community propelled him forward. Rachel was determined to find a way to support Marcus, but she also needed to deal with her own fears and insecurities. Meanwhile, Megan found herself on a path of self-discovery, seeking to understand her beliefs and what it truly meant to support equality. The tension was growing, and each of them was facing not only external challenges, but also internal ones. Marcus's struggle for recognition and Rachel and Megan's transformation were just beginning. The quest for a more equitable future would require courage, vulnerability, and above all, a willingness to confront the difficult truths each one was hiding. Before we continue with this compelling story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories, and let us know in the comments which city you are watching this video from. The tension between Marcus and Rachel increased with each passing day. Although both wanted to make a difference, the way they viewed that change was becoming a battleground. Marcus felt suffocated by the expectations of being an activist. He wanted to be heard, but not in the way Rachel imagined. For him, activism shouldn't just be a performance. It was a matter of life or death, of truth and honesty. He felt as if he were being pushed into a role he did not want, and that distressed him. Meanwhile, Rachel couldn't understand why Marcus hesitated. To her, each day that passed without him taking a stand was a lost day. She thought about how many people could benefit from his story, from his strength. However, the pressure she felt to act also made her anxious. The desire to support Marcus was strong, but her own insecurity about how to do so was a burden she carried. Every conversation they had became more difficult, and their friendship seemed to be constantly at risk of crumbling. Megan, for her part, continued to grapple with the feelings that arose after her conversation with Chris. What had seemed like a solid relationship was now becoming a source of anguish. She felt alone in her new discoveries. As she researched racism and social injustice, she realized that many of her beliefs were shaped by a life of privilege. The idea that her partner did not believe her made her question whether she truly knew him. The fear that her convictions would not be enough to make a difference consumed her, and frustration grew with each passing day. On one particularly difficult day, Marcus decided he needed time for himself. He stepped away from work and social commitments, seeking a space to reflect. As he walked through Central Park, the falling leaves seemed to echo his own sense of loss and confusion. He sat on a bench and took a deep breath, trying to find clarity. However, the thoughts wouldn't stop. He remembered his mother's words, the struggles she faced and how she always told him to be strong, but the strength he needed now felt unattainable. Loneliness enveloped him, and he felt powerless. The idea of becoming a symbol of resistance paralyzed him. He wondered if he would ever be able to break free from the invisible chains that bound him to others' expectations. It was an internal struggle that left him exhausted. During this moment of introspection, he began to question not only his capabilities, but also what success truly meant to him. What did it mean to be a successful man if it meant being treated as an object instead of a human being? Meanwhile, Rachel, concerned about Marcus's absence, decided she needed to do something. She gathered with a group of young activists who had formed after the incident at the bank. They discussed how to use their voices to promote change and make a difference. Rachel felt inspired by the passion of others, but doubt still haunted her. Deep down, she knew she needed to talk to Marcus about this, but the fear that he might not understand her held her back. Megan, in turn, decided she needed to have a frank conversation with Chris again. She could no longer bear the feeling that her relationship was falling apart. When they finally sat down to discuss it, Megan expressed her concerns, but Chris, once again defensive, accused her of being overdramatic and too emotional. Megan's frustration erupted, and she realized that the disconnection between them was greater than she had imagined. The idea of losing Chris left her desperate, but the need to be true to herself was growing stronger. However, life seemed to have a way of testing their strength. A new incident occurred in the city. A young black man was assaulted by police for no apparent reason. The news spread quickly and reignited outrage throughout the community. Marcus, upon hearing the reports, felt a wave of anger and sadness. He knew he needed to speak out, but the fear of exposing himself still paralyzed him. Rachel, on the other hand, saw this as an opportunity. She remembered Marcus and how his voice could make a difference. Determined to take action, she organized a protest and invited Marcus to speak. When she told him, Marcus's initial reaction was one of resistance. He didn't want to be the face of the movement. He wanted to be part of something bigger, but he didn't want to be the center of attention. The pressure to attend the protest and the idea of having to expose himself again left him distressed. When Megan learned about the protest, she felt there was a chance to get involved and show support for Marcus. She no longer wanted to be a passive spectator. However, the thought of attending the event made her nervous. How could she present herself alongside Marcus, knowing the disdain she had shown before? The internal struggle she faced made her feel divided. As the date of the protest approached, Marcus, Rachel, and Megan found themselves at a crucial point in their lives. Tensions were high, and each of them needed to confront their own limitations, insecurities, and fears. The quest for a more equitable future seemed more challenging than ever, but the need for change was more urgent than ever. They were about to discover that, to face the challenges ahead, they would need to unite and confront not only the world around them, but also their own truths. The day of the protest arrived, and the city was in turmoil. The streets were filled with people of all ages, united by a common cause. The air was thick with the anticipation and determination of many seeking change. Marcus, although initially reluctant, felt a deep calling within himself. He observed the energy around him, the passion on people's faces, and a part of him began to feel like he was part of something bigger. Rachel, for her part, was excited. She had worked hard to organize everything, and seeing so many people willing to fight left her hopeful. However, at the same time, a nervousness accompanied her. She knew she needed Marcus by her side, but the uncertainty about how he would react to this new reality left her uneasy. Megan arrived at the protest with her heart racing. The atmosphere pulsed with shouts of support, music, and signs calling for justice. As she walked, her gaze fixed on Marcus and Rachel. It was as if they were the pillars of her own search for belonging and truth, but the idea of joining them made her nervous. How could she be an ally when she had felt so lost and disconnected? As the protest began, the voices united in a single chorus. The chants echoed through the streets, calling for equality and respect. Marcus, amidst the crowd, felt something stir within him. He wanted to express himself, but insecurity still paralyzed him. He looked at Rachel, who was in front, leading the crowd with contagious energy. Her strength was a reminder of what could be, and he began to wonder if he was really willing to let this chance slip away. Then a group of counter-protesters appeared. Armed with hateful words and provocative signs, they began to shout, trying to destabilize the peaceful protest. The atmosphere changed instantly. Fear filled the air, and the tension became palpable. Marcus felt his heart race. He didn't want the situation to spiral out of control, and his mind began to race with thoughts of how he could protect those around him. Rachel, sensing the shift, made a bold decision. She stepped to the front line, trying to engage in dialogue with the counter-protesters. believing that empathy could calm the situation, but their words were venomous, and soon what had begun as a peaceful protest turned into a confrontation. Chaos ensued, and the voices of support were drowned out by shouts of anger. Marcus watched everything in horror. Rachel's courage, which had once inspired him, now left him in a panic. He realized that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had been a chance for change was turning into something dangerous. He knew he needed to act, but fear paralyzed him. What should he do? Be part of the solution or retreat and protect himself? Then, an unexpected moment occurred. Megan, who was there, felt overwhelmed by adrenaline. She could no longer be just a spectator. Remembering her own struggles and the need to be true to herself, she launched forward, joining Rachel at the front line. She began to shout words of support, trying to restore calm and unity. Marcus, seeing Megan expose herself, felt a wave of emotion. This was his chance to join them, to not let fear win. With a sudden impulse, he ran to the front, joining Megan and Rachel. Together they formed a human shield, trying to protect those behind them. The sight of his friends willing to fight by his side touched something deep within him. He realized that being part of something bigger also meant facing his fears and insecurities. The struggle was not just about them, it was about everyone suffering the consequences of silence and inaction. The tension rose, but in that moment Marcus felt a clear purpose. He shouted words of strength and hope, joining the crowd, and the sound of his voice merged with those of others. He was no longer alone. Rachel's eyes shone with relief as she saw him join the fight, and Megan, by his side, realized that she had found new meaning in her own journey. The protest, which had begun with so much uncertainty, was now becoming a symbol of resistance and courage. The change they sought was more than a simple idea. It was a reality they were willing to fight for together. The revelation that unity and solidarity could overcome fear transformed Marcus's heart. He began to understand that true success was not about becoming a symbol, but about being part of a community fighting for justice. That night, as they walked together, Marcus, Rachel, and Megan felt that despite the challenges, a new chapter had begun. They had found each other amid the struggle and were ready to face whatever came next. After the turmoil of the protest, the city felt quieter, but the tension still lingered in the air. Marcus, Rachel, and Megan walked together through the streets, still absorbing the intensity of what had happened. Marcus's heart raced, not only from the adrenaline but also from the new reality unfolding before him. He had found courage amid the chaos, but now he needed to deal with the consequences of his decision. That night, as he sat at home, Marcus reflected on everything he had experienced. He had shouted, exposed himself, and joined a greater cause. However, now he felt a weight on his shoulders. What would happen next? The protest had not only been a cry for change, but also a call to action. The fight he had chosen was not something that could be ignored. There was a responsibility that came with courage, and he was beginning to realize that. Rachel, on the other hand, was in a whirlwind of emotions. The adrenaline still coursed through her, but now the reality of the situation was setting in. What had started as a peaceful demonstration had transformed into something more complex. She knew that the fight for justice was not limited to a single event, and the fear that violence could repeat itself left her restless. That night, she decided she needed to meet with Marcus and Megan to discuss the next steps. They could not allow fear to paralyze them. Megan, sitting in her room, was also reflecting on what had happened. She was no longer the same as before. The impulsive act of joining Rachel and Marcus made her feel alive, but it also left her anxious. What awaited her? Being part of something bigger meant facing new adversities. She remembered the hostile glares from the counter-protesters, and the idea that she could be targeted made her nervous. But at the same time, the feeling of belonging she had experienced pushed her to continue. The next day, the three met to talk. The atmosphere was serious, but also hopeful. Marcus began to speak, his voice hesitant but firm. He expressed that he didn't want what happened the day before to be just a moment. He felt they needed to do more, to act more consistently. His words resonated with Rachel and Megan, who nodded in agreement. They were aware that the fight did not end with the protest. Rachel, with her characteristic determination, suggested that they hold weekly meetings to plan future actions. She emphasized the need to organize, educate, and mobilize more people, insisting they could not let fear win. Megan, still recovering from the intensity of the previous day, felt inspired. She wanted to be part of this, even if it meant facing her own demons. The following weeks were a mix of progress and challenges. They met with others in the community, organizing events and discussions on the topics that united them. But fear and uncertainty never stopped haunting them. Marcus, in particular, struggled internally. He was afraid that violence could happen again, and that this time he might not be able to protect his friends. Whenever he heard a siren in the distance, his heart raced, and the feeling of helplessness consumed him. Rachel noticed the change in Marcus. He seemed more distant, and concerns settled in her heart. During one of their meetings, she decided to address the issue. She asked him if he was okay, expressing her genuine worry. He hesitated, but chose to open up. He shared his fears of putting himself in danger, and questioned what would happen if something happened to him, and whether he could protect them. Rachel listened attentively, her expression softening. She reassured him that she understood his fear, and that it was completely valid, but reminded him that they were in this together. It wasn't just about him or her, it was about all of them. Their strength was in unity. Rachel's words brought Marcus temporary relief, but he still dealt with the shadow of fear. Megan, on her part, found comfort in her new support network. By sharing her insecurities with others, she realized she was not alone. Many people who joined them were also battling their own fears and uncertainties. This understanding helped solidify her role in the movement. She became an active voice, using her personal story to inspire others to join the cause. Over time, the three friends learned to navigate the new obstacles. They became more resilient, facing each event and challenge with renewed determination. Fear was still present, but now it was accompanied by the strength of solidarity. And so, their journey continued, one step at a time, towards a future where hope and courage prevailed over uncertainty. Marcus's life was in turmoil. After the chaos of the protest, he felt as if he were in a drifting boat, caught between fear and determination. Every siren passing by on the street reminded him of the tension of that day, but at the same time he realized there was something different within himself. The courage he had found in the heat of the moment was now transforming into a quest for self-confidence. He wanted to believe he could be a force for change, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. In one of their meetings, seeing Rachel and Megan interacting with other community members, Marcus felt an impulse. He wanted to join them, but insecurity still held him back. He hesitated until Rachel, noticing his internal struggle, called him to share his vision. "Marcus, your voice is important. We all have fear, but that doesn't stop us from acting," she said, encouraging him. Her words resonated in his mind, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe he could be helpful. He began to actively participate in the meetings, not just as a listener, but as a contributor. Over time, as he worked alongside people who shared his concerns, Marcus started to trust himself more. He realized he wasn't alone in his struggle, and that was a significant step in his journey of personal growth. The support and camaraderie helped him accept that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. Meanwhile, Rachel and Megan were also facing their own challenges. Rachel, with her strong spirit, found herself dealing with the consequences of her actions. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of leading. However, by opening up to her friends about her insecurities, she learned that sharing the burden made everything lighter. The conversations among them became a safe space where they could express their fears and doubts, and this strengthened the friendship between them. Megan, for her part, was on a journey of discovery. Initially, she felt like an outsider in the movement, but as she became more involved, she began to realize that her experiences, even the painful ones, had value. By sharing her story at community events, she found a new perspective. The vulnerability that once paralyzed her was now becoming a source of strength. She saw that her struggles could inspire others to join the cause, and that motivated her to keep going. The trio faced external challenges, such as the resistance from people opposed to the movement. At one event, they were confronted by a group of opponents who were hostile. Marcus's heart raced again, reminding him of the chaos of the previous protest. But instead of retreating, he recalled the lessons he had learned. He took a deep breath and, looking at Rachel and Megan by his side, felt the strength of friendship. Together they stood firm, advocating for their beliefs with passion and respect. This episode became a milestone in their lives. Marcus realized that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. With each challenge faced, he became stronger and more self-assured. He began to understand that success wasn't just about reaching a goal, but about the personal growth that came along the way. The wealth he sought wasn't material, but rather the richness of experiences and connections he was forming. As their friendship evolved, Marcus, Rachel, and Megan learned to trust each other. They became a foundation, each bringing their own strengths and weaknesses. This dynamic helped them overcome their internal conflicts and move towards a more promising future. They were no longer just friends. They were allies on a shared journey, each bringing an important piece to the puzzle. Over time, they became more than activists. They became leaders in their community. What had started as a fight against injustice transformed into a movement of solidarity and mutual support. Marcus, now more confident, began applying the lessons he had learned in his daily life. He was not only fighting for a cause, but also striving to be a better person for himself and for others. Marcus's journey of overcoming and growth wasn't easy, but his experiences shaped him into a stronger individual. He learned to accept his vulnerabilities and to value the friendships that supported him. And so, with every step taken, he not only faced his fears, but also overcame them, emerging as a symbol of hope and transformation for everyone around him. The air was heavy with the tension that hung over the square. It was a cloudy day, reflecting the climate of uncertainty that surrounded the group. Marcus, along with Rachel and Megan, was preparing to face their biggest challenge yet. What had started as a movement of hope was now about to be tested by the resistance of a group opposing everything they represented. Anger, fear, and determination were palpable. The voices of the opposing group echoed loudly, filled with hostility and disdain. For Marcus, each shout felt like a stab. His heart raced, the memory of the previous protests' chaos returning as a disturbing echo. Insecurity threatened to overwhelm him again, but he looked at Rachel and Megan by his side. The friendship they had cultivated had turned into a shield, and he knew he wasn't alone. With a deep sigh, he decided it was time to act. Rachel was the first to raise her voice. "We are here to promote peace and solidarity. We are not here to fight." She spoke with a passion that captured everyone's attention. Her words were sincere, and Marcus saw the spark in her eyes. This gave him courage. He needed to join her. With the confidence he had built, he stepped forward. "We need to listen to each other," Marcus said, his voice firmer than he expected. "Only then can we find a path to understanding. What you are doing solves nothing. It only perpetuates the cycle of hate." The opposing crowd hesitated, some people looking at the group's leaders indecisive. Marcus felt that his voice was reaching some of them. What he said was not just about the movement, but about the essence of life in community. It was a call for empathy, an invitation to unite instead of divide. Megan, noticing the change in the atmosphere, joined Marcus. "We all have stories. We all have pain, but we don't have to let that separate us," she said, her tone mixing vulnerability and strength. "We can choose understanding. We can choose friendship." Megan's words had a profound impact. He saw some people in the crowd begin to murmur among themselves, reflecting on what they had heard. It was what Marcus and his friends needed. A moment of reflection, a space for everyone to consider the possibility of dialogue. As the tension eased, Marcus realized that the true battle was not against the opponents, but within himself. He had faced his fears and insecurities, and now he was reaping the rewards of that internal struggle. He remembered the failures he had faced along the journey, the feeling of inadequacy that had accompanied him for so long. But now he felt stronger. Accepting his vulnerabilities had transformed into strength. The shouts began to diminish, and the square filled with an expectant silence. Marcus, with his heart racing, realized that this was his chance to show what truly mattered. He turned to the opposing group, his words filled with sincerity. "We are not enemies. We are here for a reason, for the good of all. No one needs to be left out. Let's come together for a better future." Feeling the shift in energy around him, Marcus found a new purpose. He no longer needed to choose between material success and the values he stood for. That choice was clear to him. What truly mattered was human connection, mutual support, and the transformation that could occur when people came together for a greater good. By the end of the conversation, some members of the opposing group approached, willing to listen. The dialogue that followed was filled with emotions and revelations. The barriers began to fall, and the square, once marked by conflict, started to transform into a space of understanding. The climax of that day was not just a triumph over the opponents, but a personal victory for Marcus. He finally understood that true wealth was not material, but rather the connection and growth he and his friends had achieved. The friendship that united them solidified in that moment, making them more than allies. They became a family. As the clouds dispersed and the sun began to shine, Marcus looked at Rachel and Megan. He felt a wave of gratitude for everything they had accomplished together. They had faced challenges, failed, and started over, but above all they learned that true transformation begins within each person. They were living proof that love and friendship can overcome any adversity. And with that, Marcus knew that his journey was just beginning. After the climax of that intense day, the square, which had once pulsed with the tension of conflict, now resonated with a new type of energy. Marcus, still feeling the warmth of adrenaline in his body, observed the people around him. The faces that had once been twisted in anger and distrust now showed expressions of curiosity and, in some cases, even regret. It was a sign that the dialogue had begun to take effect. Rachel and Megan were by his side, sharing looks of satisfaction and relief. What had started as a gloomy day had turned into a moment of hope. They knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but they were ready to face it together. Marcus felt a wave of gratitude for having such loyal friends. That day not only united them but also solidified their mission. As the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink, Marcus turned to Rachel. "Did you see how people started to listen?" "That was amazing," he said, the excitement in his voice evident. "Yes, it was. But we need to continue this work, Marcus. Change doesn't happen overnight," Rachel replied with a determined look. "We must find ways to keep the conversation alive, to create a space where everyone feels safe to share." Megan, always the more reflective one, added, "I think we also need to hear their stories. What led them to oppose us? There may be fears and concerns that we don't even know exist." Marcus agreed. He realized that to truly make a difference, they needed to understand the roots of discontent. Dialogue was a first step, but empathy and understanding were essential for creating a lasting bond. In the days that followed, Marcus's group began to organize meetings in the square. They invited members of the opposing group, creating a space where everyone could share their stories and concerns. At first, there was hesitation. Some people were still caught up in fear and resentment. But over time, the environment began to transform. The conversations grew deeper, and emotional barriers began to break down. Marcus started to feel more connected to his community. He realized that his perspective had changed. Before, he saw himself as a solitary defender, but now he felt part of something bigger. The idea of fighting for what was right was no longer just his, it was a collective struggle. The group that once seemed fragmented was now coming together around a common goal, promoting peace and understanding. In one of the meetings, an elderly man stood up, emotional. He said that he used to see them as enemies, but now he realized that they were all fighting for the same things: safety, respect, and a better future. He had been blinded by fear, but their words had opened his eyes. The room fell silent, and Marcus felt a wave of hope. The stories shared at that moment were what truly mattered. With each meeting, Marcus grew more confident. He had learned to accept his vulnerabilities and transform them into strength. The insecurities that once paralyzed him were now just part of his journey. He understood that everyone has their struggles, and that empathy is the key to change. However, not everything was easy. Marcus's group faced resistance from some who refused to let go of their beliefs. In a difficult moment, he remembered Megan's words. They needed to be patient and persistent. So he continued to work even when the path seemed full of obstacles. On a sunny day, while organizing a community event to celebrate unity, Marcus looked at Rachel and Megan. He couldn't help but feel grateful for everything they had accomplished together. He asked if they had made it, a smile on his face. Rachel replied that it was just the beginning, with a sparkle in her eyes. Change takes time, but they were on the right path. Megan said they were making history and that they just needed to stay together. Marcus felt an overwhelming emotion. They were not just friends, they were family, united by a common cause. He knew that the battle for understanding and empathy was ongoing, but looking at the faces around him, he felt they were ready to face any challenge that came. The journey was just beginning, but this time, they would not be alone. Time passed, and the square, once a stage for conflict, had become a space for gathering and dialogue. Marcus observed the changes around him, feeling that each conversation, each shared story, was a step toward peace. He reflected on his transformation. From a young idealist who saw the world in black and white, he now understood the complexity of human emotions. He had learned that true strength lies in listening, understanding, and building connections. The meetings became a tradition, and the community began to unite not only around a common goal, but also in celebrating their diversities. What once were isolated voices now resonated in harmony. The friendship between Marcus, Rachel, and Megan grew stronger, and together they became the voice. Each of them brought their own experiences and stories, adding layers to the collective narrative they were building. However, not everyone was satisfied with the new dynamic. A more radical group, which had opposed them from the beginning, began to organize, promising retaliation. Marcus realized that although the majority were willing to change, there were those who preferred conflict. One day, while walking through the square, he heard whispers of discontent. The tension was rising again. It was at that moment that Marcus remembered a conversation he had with the elderly man who had spoken at one of the meetings. The man had said that sometimes true change requires courage, and courage could be mistaken for vengeance. Those words echoed in Marcus's mind. He realized that if he wanted to protect what they had built, he needed to act. Armed with new determination, Marcus decided to confront the opponents. In a tense meeting, he stood up and with a firm voice spoke about what they had achieved together. He expressed the pain he felt seeing division threaten everything they had built. He said they didn't need more conflict. They needed a space where everyone could feel safe. Vengeance only perpetuates the cycle of pain. Marcus's words, filled with emotion, touched some hearts in the room. He made an appeal to reason, challenging them to reflect on what they truly wanted for their families and community. Some people were open, while others remained steadfast in their beliefs. But at that moment, Marcus understood that true victory wasn't about winning a debate, but about planting the seed of empathy. In the days that followed, the square became a symbol of peaceful resistance. Marcus's group continued to meet, and the message of hope began to spread. He realized that revenge didn't have to be an act of retaliation, but a motivating force for meaningful change. Over time, the resistance began to dissipate, and the square transformed into a space for celebration and dialogue. Marcus understood that true success wasn't just in winning a battle, but in uniting people around a greater purpose. He not only overcame his insecurities, but also helped others do the same. As he watched the community gathered, Marcus felt a deep gratitude. The journey of transformation taught him about the importance of empathy, dialogue, and friendship. He realized that often, change begins within us, and when we come together, we can overcome any obstacle. Now he invited everyone to reflect on their own experiences. Everyone has a story, and each story matters. How about sharing your reflections in the comments? Together, we can continue to build a more understanding and united world. If you feel inspired by this journey, like and subscribe to